Wealthy CEO fakes sleep to spy on his maid's daughter. What he witnesses leaves him speechless. He had built an empire worth billions, yet his heart was emptier than his gold-plated office. Every morning, his world began with the sound of polished shoes, marble floors, and silence. But one afternoon, something unusual broke that silence, the faint hum of a child's song. It wasn't supposed to be there. Curious, the CEO leaned back in his chair, pretending to nap as the soft voice grew louder. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw his maid's little daughter, standing before the open vault wearing oversized cleaning gloves, pretending to scrub invisible dirt. What he saw next would make him question everything he thought he knew about life, race, and worth. Charles Whitmore was known for two things: his money and his ruthlessness. A self-made billionaire, he believed every man was responsible for his own destiny. To him, poverty was a choice, and compassion a weakness. His office, towering above the city skyline, was more of a fortress than a workplace. Marble floors, imported leather, and a private vault stacked with money. Every detail whispered power, but behind the spotless glass walls there was a quieter presence. Marissa, the cleaner. She came before dawn, left after dusk, invisible yet indispensable. Few even knew she had a daughter, a bright-eyed 5-year-old named Ava, who waited patiently in a corner whenever her mother worked late. Charles barely noticed them, until one afternoon when his meeting was canceled. He decided to stay in his office and rest. As he leaned back, pretending to nap, he heard the faint sound of humming. It was the tune of a lullaby, innocent yet hauntingly pure. When he slightly opened his eyes, he saw little Ava standing by his open safe, her small hands covered with oversized yellow gloves. She wasn't stealing. She was pretending to clean the money, giggling softly as if the stacks were her toys. Charles stayed still, pretending to sleep, watching as the daughter of a maid treated his fortune as nothing more than play. He didn't know it yet, but that simple moment would unravel years of prejudice, pride, and pain. Over the next few days, Charles couldn't shake off that image. The innocence of that little girl cleaning imaginary dirt off millions had disturbed him more than he cared to admit. He began to watch quietly whenever Marissa and Ava were around. He noticed things he had never cared to see. How Marissa's hands were cracked from bleach, how she ate leftover crumbs during breaks, and how Ava carried herself with quiet dignity despite her torn shoes. One evening, when most of the staff had gone home, Charles overheard something. Marissa was on the phone whispering in tears. The school had refused to enroll Ava, claiming no seats left. But Charles knew what that really meant. They didn't want a black maid's daughter mixing with the children of privilege. That night, Charles sat in silence. For the first time in years, he questioned the world he helped build, a world that worshipped wealth but overlooked worth. Days passed, and his interest grew. He watched how Ava would use empty bottles and papers from the trash to build castles. One day, she placed a scrap paper crown on her head and whispered, "I'll clean all the gold when I grow up." Her innocence was painful. Charles found himself torn. The man who once believed every person should earn their place began to see that not everyone was given a fair start. One morning, when Marissa came in late, security stopped her at the lobby, claiming company policy. She pleaded, explaining her daughter had a fever. The guard mocked her accent. The humiliation was casual, familiar, and for the first time, Charles felt rage that wasn't about money or business. Later that evening, he pretended to fall asleep again in his chair. Ava entered quietly, humming. She placed his tie neatly on his desk, mimicking her mother's movements. Then she turned toward the open vault, staring at the mountain of cash. But this time she didn't pretend to clean it. She sighed softly and said, "Mommy said money makes people forget nice things." Charles felt a lump in his throat. That one sentence hit harder than any business loss he had ever endured. That weekend, Charles arrived at the office earlier than usual. He saw Marissa scrubbing the floor alone. Her daughter wasn't there. Something about her silence felt different. He asked Wylant for the first time if everything was all right. Marissa hesitated, then broke down. Ava had been turned away from another school. The principal said their kind might not fit in with the other kids. Marissa's voice trembled as she said, "She just wants to learn." That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He sat in his mansion surrounded by luxury, but every reflection in his glass walls seemed to ask, "What have you done for someone who can't repay you?" The next morning, he returned to the office and found Ava waiting outside the janitor's closet, holding her mother's gloves. When she saw him, she smiled shyly. "Mommy said you're the man who owns all the shiny things," she said. Charles smiled weakly. But when she looked up at him and asked, "Does owning shiny things make people kind?" he felt his world collapse. The man who once saw race as statistics and poverty as laziness suddenly saw it as a chain, one that people like him had locked generations into. That afternoon, Charles made a call. The next day, Ava was accepted into one of the city's best schools, anonymously, sponsored by a private donor. He also established a scholarship for the children of his company's cleaning staff. When Marissa found out, she wept in silence. She never knew who did it, but Charles knew, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly clean. Weeks passed. Life continued. But something in Charles had shifted forever. He began greeting his cleaning staff. He installed a daycare corner for employees' children. He even banned the discriminatory appearance policy that had quietly existed for years. Then one afternoon, as he sat in his chair, he heard that same familiar hum again. Ava was back, visiting her mother during school break. She wore a crisp uniform and carried a stack of books. When she saw Charles, she smiled brightly and waved her yellow gloves. For a moment, he felt tears sting his eyes. She had no idea that her innocence had changed him, that her little act of play had exposed the dirt on his soul far more than any mop could. He looked at her and thought about how easily people judge by skin, by background, by poverty, without realizing how purity, grace, and wisdom can come from the very places society ignores. As Ava skipped away, humming that same tune, Charles leaned back and closed his eyes again, this time not to fake sleep, but to remember. In a world obsessed with power and wealth, it took the daughter of a maid to remind him that real richness is measured not by what you own, but by how you see others, because sometimes it takes the smallest hands to clean the biggest hearts. And maybe that's the kind of wealth this world truly needs.